There are two kinds of people in HOA neighborhoods: those who follow the rules because they have to, and those who think the rules don't apply to them. My neighbor Karen? She belonged to the second group, and I learned that the hard way. I had dealt with her pettiness before: passive-aggressive notes about my grass being a quarter-inch too long, complaints about my trash cans being an eyesore, even a ridiculous fine for having my porch light on past 10 p.m. But what she did this time? This time she crossed the line. Before we dive in, what's the pettiest thing an HOA or a neighbor has done to you? Drop your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to support this channel. It started small like most things do. My electricity bill spiked out of nowhere. At first I thought maybe I had left something running, an old fridge, the AC working overtime, maybe even the water heater acting up. But none of it added up. Then I noticed something odd. Every other night Karen's brand new electric car was parked right next to my driveway. That was unusual. She had her own driveway, her own garage, and even an HOA-approved charging station installed in her home. So why was she suddenly so interested in parking near me? One night I decided to stay up late and keep an eye out. I turned off all the lights in my house and watched from my window. Sure enough, just after midnight, Karen crept over to the side of my house, dragging an extension cord with her. My outlet. She was plugging her car into my outlet. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't enough that she loved throwing HOA rules at everyone else. Now she was straight up stealing from me? My first instinct was to storm outside and confront her right then and there, but I stopped myself. No. That's what she'd want. A screaming match that she could twist into some aggressive neighbor narrative. I needed proof. The next day I set up a small security camera pointing straight at the outlet. It was motion activated, so it would only record when someone was there. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The very next night Karen was at it again. This time the camera caught everything: her sneaking over, plugging in, and even checking over her shoulder like she knew she was doing something wrong. I had her. But I wasn't going to act just yet. The next morning I casually mentioned my electric bill in the neighborhood group chat. I wasn't outright accusing anyone, just throwing it out there. Hey, anyone else notice a random spike in their electricity bill? Mine's been almost double lately. Karen responded immediately. Oh wow, maybe you left something on? The audacity. A few neighbors chimed in with sympathy and I played along, pretending I was just confused about the increase. I wanted her to think she was in the clear, that I was too oblivious to notice her little scam. Meanwhile I was planning my next move. The second night I let her do it again. I watched from my window as she plugged in her car, smug as ever, thinking she was getting away with it. This time I noticed something even more infuriating. Not only was she stealing my electricity, but she was wrapping the cord around my bushes to make it less noticeable. Like she had a whole system in place. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could pull this off. I spent the next afternoon setting my trap. If Karen wanted to steal from me, I'd give her a special surprise. I installed a dummy outlet right next to the real one that wasn't connected to any power source. Then I added a hidden speaker inside the fake outlet box. I loaded up a custom sound file, a deep, official-sounding voice that I knew would make her regret ever stepping foot on my property. That night, everything was set. As expected, just after midnight, Karen made her way over, extension cord in hand. She plugged into the dummy outlet, not realizing it was fake. And the moment she did, the speaker activated. Warning: unauthorized power access detected. This incident has been recorded. Please step away from the outlet. Karen jumped back like she'd been electrocuted. She yanked the cord out so fast she almost tripped over her own feet. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing as she looked around frantically, probably wondering if she was about to be arrested. She grabbed her cord and practically sprinted back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she'd be too scared to try again. I even considered being done with the whole thing, deleting the footage, moving on. But the next day Karen proved just how bold, or just how stupid she really was. Because that very evening, she marched over to my house and reported me to the HOA. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. My heart pounded as I stared at the security footage on my phone. Karen's entitled smirk flashed across the screen as she confidently walked up my driveway, plugged in her electric car, and leaned against it as if she owned the place. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. She wasn't even trying to be sneaky anymore. She had grown bold, careless, fully convinced that no one could touch her. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around my phone. This wasn't just about a higher electricity bill anymore. This was about principle. Karen thought she could take what wasn't hers, manipulate the HOA into looking the other way, and get away with it without consequence. Well, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I took a deep breath and set my plan into motion. First, I needed more undeniable proof, evidence that even the HOA couldn't ignore. The footage I had was good, but I wanted more. So, I installed a hidden camera directly above the outlet, ensuring I would get a crystal clear view of her face every time she snuck over to steal power. Then I added a power usage tracker to the outlet, logging every time it was used and for how long. Now there would be no denying the theft. But Karen wasn't my only concern. I needed to know if she was doing this to anyone else. If she was bold enough to steal from me, there was no way she was stopping at just one victim. So, I started talking to my neighbors. I casually brought up the increasing electricity bills with Mr. Peterson, the elderly man who lived next door. His reaction was immediate. His eyes darkened and his hands clenched into fists. "You too?" he muttered under his breath. That's when he told me everything. Karen had been doing this for months, not just to me but to at least 2 other households. Their bills had mysteriously skyrocketed, and they had their suspicions, but no one had caught her in the act. Until now. I wasn't just fighting my own battle anymore, I had an entire neighborhood behind me. And that's when I knew Karen was about to have a very, very bad day. I called an informal meeting with the other victims, showing them the security footage I had gathered. The reaction was immediate. Anger. Frustration. A burning desire for justice. "This has to stop," one neighbor growled, his fists clenched. "The HOA needs to step in." I nodded. "I agree. But they won't listen unless we hit them with undeniable proof and overwhelming pressure. We need to come together." So we did. We gathered every bit of evidence we had: video footage, power usage logs, and written testimonies from multiple homeowners. Then we drafted a formal complaint, signed by every single victim. There was no way the HOA could ignore us now. The following morning, I personally delivered the complaint to the HOA board, making sure it landed directly in the hands of the president. She skimmed through the documents, her expression unreadable. "We'll investigate," she said in a clipped tone, but something about the way she avoided eye contact set off alarm bells in my head. Something wasn't right. I left the meeting feeling uneasy, and my gut feeling was confirmed when days passed with no action. No emails. No announcements. No consequences for Karen. It was as if the complaint had disappeared into thin air. Frustrated, I called the HOA office demanding an update. The response? Vague excuses. Claims that they were still reviewing the situation. I wasn't buying it. Then it hit me. Karen had connections within the HOA. That's why she had always gotten away with bending the rules. That's why no one had stopped her before. And that's why, despite overwhelming evidence, nothing was happening now. If the HOA wasn't going to help us, we would have to take matters into our own hands. That night, I set my final trap. I modified the outdoor outlet, wiring it to a hidden power switch inside my house. The moment Karen plugged in her car, she would think she was getting free electricity, but in reality, nothing would be charging. And to top it off, I installed a motion-activated speaker hidden nearby. The next night, I waited, watching the security feed on my phone. Right on schedule, just past midnight, Karen slinked out of her house, glancing around like some second-rate criminal. She walked straight into my driveway, her entitled smirk still plastered on her face, and plugged in her charger. But this time something was different. The moment the plug connected, my pre-recorded message blared through the silent night. "Attention, you are stealing electricity. This incident has been recorded and reported to the authorities." Karen's reaction was priceless. Her entire body jolted as if she had been electrocuted, her eyes widening in pure panic. She scrambled backward, yanking the plug out so fast she nearly fell over. For a brief moment, she just stood there, frozen in terror, before bolting toward her house like a scared rabbit. I watched the entire thing unfold, struggling to contain my laughter. But this was just the beginning. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, ensuring I had every angle of Karen's panic-stricken retreat. Then I sent it to every neighbor who had signed the complaint. It didn't take long for the video to spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, nearly the entire neighborhood had seen it. That was when the real pressure started. The other victims, furious and emboldened, stormed into the next HOA meeting, demanding immediate action. Mr. Peterson led the charge, his voice shaking with fury as he slammed the evidence onto the table. "No more delays. No more excuses," he thundered. "This is theft and it needs to be dealt with now." The room erupted into arguments, the board scrambling to regain control. But with so many people demanding action, they couldn't ignore it any longer. The president hesitated, looking around nervously before finally caving under the pressure. "We will take immediate disciplinary action against Karen," she announced reluctantly. And just like that, Karen's reign of unchecked entitlement had come to an end. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because Karen was furious. And when an entitled neighbor feels cornered, they don't just back down. They fight back. And that's exactly what she was about to do. Karen's retreat was only temporary. The next morning, I expected to see her shaken, maybe even embarrassed enough to finally stop. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. Instead, she came back angrier than ever. By mid-morning, a letter from the HOA was taped to my door. My stomach twisted as I pulled it off and read the bolded words at the top. Violation notice. Violation. For what? I skimmed through the accusations, my hands clenching tighter with every sentence. According to the HOA, I had installed an unauthorized surveillance system that invaded a neighbor's privacy. My blood boiled. This was Karen's doing. She had run straight to the HOA, twisting the story to paint herself as the victim. She was trying to turn the tables on me. I wasn't about to let her get away with it. That afternoon I called up a few neighbors. Mr. Peterson, who had already been fuming about Karen, was the first to pick up. I filled him in on the HOA notice and his response was instant. "She's trying to cover her tracks. We're not letting her win." Word spread fast. Within hours, 3 other neighbors who had caught Karen sneaking around their properties reached out to me, all willing to back me up. Strength in numbers, that was the one thing Karen hadn't counted on. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days, and I was coming prepared. When the evening of the HOA meeting arrived, I walked into the clubhouse armed with my evidence. The room was packed. Homeowners sat on foldable chairs, whispering among themselves. Karen was already seated, her arms crossed, a smug smirk on her face. The HOA president, Mr. Langston, cleared his throat. "We have a violation complaint against." I cut in before he could even finish. "Actually, I'd like to submit a counter-complaint." I stepped forward and placed a laptop on the table, playing the footage. The security cameras I had set up captured everything. The sneaking, the plugging in, the theft in action. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. I turned to the HOA board. "Now let's talk about real violations." Karen shot up from her chair. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "He's targeting me. He's invading my privacy." I held up the HOA rulebook I had brought with me. Actually, per HOA guidelines, outdoor surveillance is completely allowed. What's not allowed is stealing electricity. The HOA board exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard. Mr. Langston sighed. "We'll need time to review this." The crowd wasn't having it. Mr. Peterson stood up. "We don't need a review. The evidence is right there. She's been stealing from all of us." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The pressure was on. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing she was losing control. Her usual confidence was slipping, replaced by panic. "This is ridiculous. You're all just..." "Enough," Mr. Langston cut her off. He looked exhausted. "Karen will discuss this further. But in the meantime, you're prohibited from using any outdoor outlets in the neighborhood." It wasn't the crushing punishment I wanted, but it was enough to wipe the smirk off Karen's face. But she wasn't done yet. Because as I walked out of that meeting, I saw Karen standing near her car, phone in hand, glaring at me. And that's when I realized, this wasn't over. The next day, I woke up to find something that made my jaw clench so hard I thought I might break a tooth. A letter from Karen's lawyer. This was about to get ugly. I stood at my doorstep, gripping the letter, my pulse pounding. Karen had actually hired a lawyer? Over this? I tore open the envelope, skimming through the legal jargon until my eyes landed on the heart of the issue. Defamation. Harassment. Invasion of privacy. She was accusing me of damaging her reputation and creating a hostile environment. I almost laughed. Karen had spent weeks stealing from me, lying to the HOA, and now she wanted to play victim? But as absurd as it was, I knew better than to take this lightly. HOA disputes had a way of spiraling into absurd legal battles, and I wasn't about to let her twist reality to suit her narrative. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I called my own lawyer. Mr. Nolan, a sharp-witted attorney with years of experience dealing with HOA nonsense, listened to my story carefully before exhaling a low chuckle. "Sounds like a classic bully move. She's trying to intimidate you into backing off." "Yeah, well, it's not working." I leaned against my kitchen counter, rubbing my temples. "What are my options?" "First, don't engage with her directly. Second, let's prepare a response. You have evidence proving she was stealing electricity, right? Plenty. Good. Then she doesn't have a case. In fact, if she wants to take this further, we can file a counterclaim for damages and harassment. I like the sound of that. But before I could even draft my response, Karen escalated things again. By that evening, every house in the neighborhood had received a letter from Karen. She had gone full scorched earth, sending out a mass mailer claiming I was a dangerous stalker who had been spying on her and that my cameras were a violation of everyone's privacy. She even included a petition to have my security cameras removed under the guise of protecting the community. The audacity was unreal. But the part that made my blood truly boil? She had edited the footage she stole from the HOA meeting, cutting it up to make it seem like I had been the aggressor all along. I stared at the letter in my hands, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. Karen had made her move. Now it was time to make mine. Karen's humiliation at the HOA meeting was just the beginning. I knew she wouldn't take this loss lying down. The very next morning, I noticed her pacing outside, phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted in frustration. She was making calls, probably trying to pull strings within the HOA or find a way to flip the situation. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. Later that day, an HOA notice landed in my mailbox. My stomach tightened as I opened it. A formal complaint had been filed, against me. According to the document, I had violated HOA rules by installing unauthorized surveillance equipment and harassing a fellow homeowner. I couldn't believe it. Karen was trying to turn the tables. But I had come too far to let her manipulate her way out of this. I pulled out my security footage, the very proof that had exposed her, and marched straight to the HOA office. This time, I wasn't leaving until something was done. When I arrived, I was met with the usual indifference. The HOA board members barely glanced at me as they shuffled papers. But then I pulled out my laptop and played the video, clear, undeniable evidence of Karen's theft. The room fell silent. One board member, an older woman named Linda, cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Well, this certainly does complicate things," she muttered. "Complicates things?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Karen has been stealing from me and others for months. And instead of dealing with it, I get slapped with a complaint? This is a joke." One of the other members, a man in his 50s with graying hair, sighed. "Look, we'll review this further, but we can't just overturn a complaint without following procedure." I clenched my fists, holding back my frustration. They were stalling. But I had a backup plan. If the HOA wasn't going to take action, maybe it was time to take this to a higher authority. The next morning, I paid a visit to a lawyer. It turns out, what Karen had been doing wasn't just an HOA violation, it was actual theft. And with the amount of proof I had, pressing charges was a very real option. When Karen received a legal notice informing her of the pending charges, the reaction was immediate. She stormed to my house, banging on my door like a madwoman. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You're ruining my life over nothing." I stared at her, calm and unmoving. "You did that yourself, Karen." She fumed, but for the first time she had no comeback. No threats, no smug remarks. Just desperation. And I wasn't done yet. Word spread fast through the neighborhood, and soon the entire community was buzzing about Karen's antics. More neighbors came forward with complaints, recounting her history of bending rules, causing problems and skirting consequences. The pressure was mounting, and even the HOA couldn't ignore it anymore. 2 days later, I received another notice, this time from the HOA. Karen had been officially fined, and her complaint against me had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. But the best part? A final line in the notice stating that the board was reviewing Karen's conduct for further disciplinary action. The walls were closing in on her, and this time there was no escape. And just when I thought things couldn't get any better, something happened that made everything worth it. Late one evening, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the peaceful silence, when I noticed something new in Karen's yard, a large "for sale" sign, standing tall in the grass. Karen was leaving. A slow smile spread across my face. She had played her games, she had tried to manipulate and cheat her way through life, but in the end, justice had caught up to her. And I had made sure of it. Karen's "for sale" sign wasn't just an empty threat, it was real. For the first time since this mess started, she wasn't scheming, lying, or trying to manipulate her way out. She was running. But I wasn't about to start celebrating just yet. A few days after the sign went up, I noticed something odd. Karen wasn't packing. Her car was still parked in the driveway at all hours, and she hadn't listed any of her furniture on the community sale page, something most homeowners did before moving. It felt off. Then one morning I stepped outside and saw Karen standing in her yard talking to a man in a suit. A real estate agent, I assumed. But then I noticed something even stranger. Karen wasn't showing him the house. She was pointing toward mine. I leaned against my porch railing, pretending to check my phone while keeping an eye on them. The agent was nodding, taking notes, and glancing in my direction. My stomach twisted. Was she trying to sell her house, by making me look bad? It wasn't beyond her. After everything she had pulled, I wouldn't put anything past her. Sure enough, my suspicion was confirmed when I overheard a neighbor talking about a safety concern Karen had mentioned to potential buyers. She was spreading rumors that I was a troublemaker, that my house had been under investigation, and that new homeowners would constantly deal with issues living next to me. Classic Karen, trying to burn everything down on her way out. I wasn't about to let her ruin my reputation just because she had finally run out of schemes. That night I came up with a plan. If Karen wanted to make selling her house as messy as possible, I'd return the favor. First, I had a few friendly conversations with neighbors, making sure the truth about Karen's history spread faster than her lies. Word of mouth was powerful, and soon enough, potential buyers were hearing both sides of the story before making any decisions. Then, I made sure Karen's listing didn't look as appealing as she wanted it to. I casually mentioned to the HOA that her yard, already an overgrown mess, was in clear violation of community guidelines. Within 24 hours, she had received a notice requiring her to clean it up. But the final touch? I reached out to a friend who worked in real estate and had them run the numbers on Karen's property. Turns out, she had overvalued her house by nearly $50,000, thinking she could bluff her way into a bigger payday. When my friend casually brought this up at an open house, the potential buyers weren't pleased. Karen was backed into a corner. If she wanted to sell, she'd have to drop her price, fix her violations, and worst of all, play fair. For once in her life, she had no shortcuts, no loopholes, and no way to cheat the system. But just as I thought I had seen the last of her tricks, Karen pulled one final desperate move. Late one evening, just as I was about to head to bed, I saw something on my security camera. Karen sneaking into my yard with a small pair of wire cutters. She was up to something. And this time I was ready. I stared at the security feed, watching Karen creep toward my property line like a raccoon sniffing around for trouble. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her grip on those wire cutters was firm. She had a mission, and judging by the way she was moving, it wasn't just a petty act of defiance. This was something desperate. I zoomed in. She crouched near my electrical box, glancing around nervously. Then she reached up and started fiddling with the main power connection. Was she seriously trying to cut my electricity? I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. She had stolen from me, lied about me, tried to ruin my reputation, and now she was pulling this? The moment I saw those wire cutters clamp down, I knew she had crossed the line for the last time. But I wasn't about to storm out and stop her. No, I had something better planned. I reached for my phone and opened the special app one had installed just for situations like this. With one tap, the floodlights in my yard blazed to life, casting an almost blinding glow over Karen's hunched figure. She froze like a deer caught in headlights. Then, a new sound filled the air, an automated voice from my smart security system. I had pre-recorded a few messages in case of intruders, but this one was special. Warning: this property is under live surveillance. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Authorities have been notified. Karen yelped, dropping the cutters as if they had burned her fingers. She scrambled backward, but her panic got the best of her. She tripped over her own feet and landed flat on her back in my flower bed. I stepped outside, keeping my expression neutral. "Karen," I said, crossing my arms. "What exactly are you doing?" She blinked rapidly, looking anywhere but at me. I was just cutting my power? Again? She opened her mouth, probably to unleash some excuse, but I held up my phone, showing her the live security feed. Her face turned ghostly pale. "This is trespassing," I said slowly, giving her time to let it sink in. "And sabotage." Karen swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking. You never do," I cut in. "But the HOA will. And the police." She paled even more. "Wait. No, we don't have to do that. I'll fix this, I promise." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "Fix it how, Karen? You already tried selling your house by lying about me. You're still spreading rumors. You've been stealing from me for weeks. And now this." She was shaking now, fully realizing the weight of what she had just done. "Please," she whispered. I'll leave. I'll sell. I'll drop the price. Just don't get me in trouble." For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted her to sweat. Then I sighed. You have one chance, Karen. One. She nodded frantically. Okay. I'll be out by the end of the month. I narrowed my eyes. And you're going to keep my name out of your mess. No more lies. No more drama. Yes, I swear. I exhaled, glancing at the wire cutters still lying in the grass. Fine. But I swear if I see you anywhere near my property again. You won't, she blurted, practically stumbling to her feet. You won't see me again. I promise. She bolted back toward her house and I stood there watching her go. I should have felt relieved. I had backed her into a corner, forced her to accept reality. But something in my gut told me it wasn't over just yet. And I would soon find out. I was right. Karen was gone. Or so I thought. For the next few days her house sat eerily quiet. No loud phone calls on the porch. No dramatic confrontations in the driveway. No signs of her lurking around my electrical outlets like some energy-hungry gremlin. She had retreated and the neighborhood was finally peaceful again. But something wasn't sitting right with me. Karen wasn't the type to back down so easily. She had spent weeks stealing electricity, lying to the HOA, and making my life miserable, just to suddenly wave a white flag? It didn't add up. Then late one night I got my answer. It started with a noise. A low, mechanical hum like something being powered on. I frowned, grabbing my phone and checking the security app. The motion sensor had been triggered in my backyard. I tapped into the camera feed. And there she was. Karen. Standing in the darkness, hood up, flashlight in hand. But she wasn't near my electrical box this time. No, she was farther back, near the alley behind my property. And she wasn't alone. I zoomed in. A white van was idling just beyond my fence, its headlights off. Karen was talking to someone, gesturing wildly, pointing toward my house. The figure she was speaking to was dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by shadows. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about her stealing electricity anymore. This was something else. Something bigger. I hit the record button on my app, capturing everything. Then I turned on my microphone. Karen, you really don't learn, do you? Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash. The man she was with stiffened, then took a step back toward the van. I didn't give them a chance to run. I had planned ahead for this. The moment Karen had started acting suspicious, I had made a few calls. Strengthened my security system. Installed floodlights in the backyard. And, most importantly, connected my cameras directly to local law enforcement. With one tap, I triggered the final phase of my plan. Every single light in my yard turned on. The alley was suddenly bathed in blinding white light, exposing Karen and her mystery accomplice in full view. The van's engine roared as the driver panicked, tires screeching as it reversed down the road. Karen? She just stood there, frozen like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. And then sirens. The police weren't far. I had made sure of that. Within seconds, a squad car turned the corner, red and blue lights bouncing off every house on the block. Karen finally moved, bolting toward her house. But it was too late. The officers were already on her, cutting off her escape. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, watching as she pleaded with them. It's not what it looks like. I swear. I was just. I smiled. Trying to get one last petty act in before leaving? Her face twisted in rage. You set me up. I tilted my head. No, Karen. You set yourself up. The officers weren't interested in her excuses. One of them turned to me. Sir, do you have security footage of this? I held up my phone. Oh, I've got everything. Karen paled as they took the device from me, reviewing the footage. Then, with a deep sigh, one officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and attempted vandalism. Karen sputtered. Wait, no. You don't understand. She didn't get to finish. The cuffs clicked around her wrists and the officers led her to the squad car. As they drove off, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. It was over. This time for good. The house went up for sale the next week. No lies, no shady tactics. Just an overpriced listing that sat for months because no one wanted a house with that reputation. And me? I never had to worry about stolen electricity again. Lesson learned, Karen. Lesson learned.